All right, welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here today talking to Will Zhang and Amy Yao on behalf of their co-author team, taking a look in more detail at the paper that they had that came out in the September 2024 issue of JAR. Their article is titled What Drives Advertisers Toward or Away from Immersive Virtual Spaces? The Metaverse Conundrum, Affordances and Disaffordances Through the Eyes of Advertisers. So thank you so much for being on, Amy and Will.
Thanks for having us, Colin.
Thank you.
Awesome. So really neat paper and very topical as well too, as we're seeing, a lot of discussion going on around experiential advertising and perhaps moving to the metaverse question mark, right? So to start us off, there's probably a lot of people who are listening who may not have heard of your paper yet or necessarily read it yet. So could you give us kind of a brief overview of what it is you're looking at and what kind of investigation you go through and do in this article?
So we're looking at the metaverse, and it's, as you know, it's been hyped up a lot. We've seen headlines calling it the future of marketing, but we wanted to go beyond the hype and actually hear from the people working advertising day to day. So we interviewed 48 advertising practitioners around the world to understand how they're approaching these immersive virtual spaces. And we wanted to know what excites them, what worries them, and actually like whether they're adopting it at all. So we used the affordance lens to look at this. And what came out of these interviews were really interesting. On one hand, there's a lot of potential. We identified 4 key affordances that make the metaverse really appealing to advertisers, but then there's also 4 major disaffordances or barriers that are holding people back. And we also contribute by defining the metaverse from the advertiser's perspective, which was a gap we found in the literature.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So just for people who may not be familiar, what exactly is an affordance? Yeah.
So affordance is really like what are the opportunities and that enable the object or the person to go into that space. So affordance, for example, of the metaverse for advertising practitioner could be that is a novel advertising space. So should I go through the affordances and the
Yeah,
findings?
if you want to, sure. Yeah. Unless it's
Great. Okay.
yeah.
The first affordance is all about the novelty of the metaverse. Advertisers see it as totally a new space and where they can create campaigns that just aren't possible anywhere else. So they get this sense of freedom in this virtual world. For example, one participant, an advertising specialist from the Netherlands, put it perfectly. She said, there's no limits in the virtual world. You can do as you like. You can make it as big as you want or go as crazy and integrate whatever audio you want as well. So I think it's like an advertising paradise for brands. And that really captures the excitement and the idea that you're not limited by the constraints of physical space or traditional ad formats like the billboards or traditional ad formats. And the second affordance is immersion. And this is what was the most common theme across all the interviews. Advertisers felt that the metaverse allowed for a much deeper engagement than traditional 2D ads or even websites. People talked about the VR headsets and the sensory experience that came from with them. The idea that you're not just seeing an ad, but you're immersed in it, you're inside it. And that makes it really memorable and emotionally impactful. And it isn't just about what brands can do, it's also about what consumers can experience. So advertisers are starting to think about how these immersive experiences might help people actually connect with brands in very different ways. It's a different kind of storytelling, and for many, that's very incredibly exciting. So those are the 2 affordances. And shall I carry on? Yeah, with the
Oh,
other.
sure. Yeah, I think this is a great recap for folks. Yeah.
Okay, and then the third affordance is audience targeting. So the metaverse is being seen as a way to reach very specific, very hard to reach groups, especially younger audiences. And then one participant who is a marketing manager from a big service firm from China told us that younger generations like Gen Zs are more interested in and open to the metaverse with a higher level of acceptance for metaverse advertising. So while the metaverse might not be having this mass appeal yet, advertisers are thinking about it as a niche opportunity, a place to connect with tech-savvy, early adopter audiences in a way that feels much more natural to them. And then finally, there's the strategic use of metaverse to signal this innovation. So even if advertisers aren't really seeing huge returns inside the metaverse just yet, they're just seeing it as a way of shaping how their brand is seen from the outside. So Sarah, an account supervisor in the US, talked about how the companies are using the metaverse as a way to show how bold they are, how innovative they are, and how ahead of the curve they are. And Frank, an ad consultant from the UK, really captured this with the quote saying, I actually think that advertising is advantageous in the metaverse. The real benefit is the cachet that you get from PR outside the metaverse, saying to people, well, we're a metaverse brand. How great are we? You know, look how cool we are. Look how innovative and futuristic we are. So it's not just about the functionality, it's about reputation. And being in this metaverse for some is a way to tell the world, you know, we're forward thinking, we're cutting edge. So we talked about the four main affordances, things that make metaverse appealing. But we also, in our research, talked about a number of significant disaffordances as well, barriers that are holding advertisers back from this space. So despite all the hype, you know, adoption is still relatively limited, as you know. So we also found four disaffordances. Do we have any
Yeah,
questions?
yeah, for sure. I love the different the things you described there as well too, and you know, the advertiser's paradise. I think that's a great phrase. And then also, you know, discussing just the challenges as well too of getting in there. And then it's interesting as well too. You talk about the signal or the you know, the cachet that comes from simply being involved, even if people themselves don't use it, right? That's quite cool. Yeah.
I mean, like there's four disaffordances as well that kind of limits the way people, you know, see the metaverse and the potential and opportunities that advertisers can gain from it. I mean, the first and most commonly mentioned barrier was simply just limited reach of the metaverse right now.
Mm.
I mean, across the board, participants told us that the audience just isn't there yet, at least not in numbers that would justify such a big investment. Um, Jonathan, for example, mentioned that many people do not have access to the hardware at the moment, and another participant, Leah, said that the current user experience, saying that the visuals still feel quite cartoonesque, which doesn't quite hit the mark for some brands. And then there's a other side, the client side. So adoption isn't just about advertisers being ready, it's about the clients being able to engage with the space too. He put it simply, it's not just about implementing it, it's also about them having the ability to engage in it first. And so whilst it needs to hit what we call critical mass, that's when advertisers will really, you know, start to move into this space. And closely linked to the closely linked to the reach, which is the first disaffordance, is the anticipated lack of return on investment. Many of these advertising professionals we spoke to didn't really see a clear path to generating really good value through the metaverse. And the tools needed like AR and VR are still very expensive and unpredictable, and there's still very little in the way of standard measurement. The issue is especially tough for, you know, smaller firms. Larger firms with, you know, larger pockets might be able to experiment and absorb the risks, but for others, you know, every dollar counts. So it's hard for small to medium-sized companies. And Anne, one of the participants, shared that her firm tries to get her clients to invest in these technologies because she's really excited about it. But it's a hard sell because especially when most of these brands are more focused on the bottom line. In her words, brands are more low-level funnel revenue and profit-driven right now, which makes the upper funnel experimental work in the metaverse a tough proposition, really. Okay, and just two more, okay? And then the third disaffordance we uncovered was around the expertise, or maybe the lack of this requisite technological expertise. And even though there was interest from the participants in exploring the metaverse, many participants said that their teams just didn't have this technological know-how and on how to make it happen. And beyond the individual skills, there was also confusion as to, you know, who should be responsible for the metaverse campaign. Should it be with the creative or the tech or strategy? And then one participant noted that there was no clear department taking ownership of this space, and that creates a kind of paralysis within the firm. And also hiring external experts isn't always easy because the demand for metaverse savvy talent is very high and the cost can be quite significant. So even if there's a will there, the capability isn't often there as well. And then the final disaffordance is poor interoperability, and that came up as another key obstacle. Right now, the different metaverse platforms don't really talk to each other, and that was mentioned by the participants. That means that you can't really move easily move avatars between the spaces or deploy campaigns across multiple platforms or use the same hardware across different environments. So for advertisers trying to run this a scalable or multi-platform campaign, that can cause a huge headache. Yeah, so yeah, without interoperability, the metaverse feels quite fragmented for these advertisers at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that, detailed summary of the, different affordances and disaffordances as well too. That's really, really nice overview of what you've got in the paper. So I'm curious now. So like, given all your findings and the rich findings that you have, like, what are the kind of key takeaways for advertisers? So, like, what does this mean? What kind of new insights come from this important study that you did?
Thanks, Colin, for asking the question. Really appreciate it. So basically, by doing the research, we offer a ground understanding of why advertisers are hesitant or enthusiastic towards Metaverse as a advertising outlet, as a marketing channel. And by doing this, we offer a framework, a roadmap, or toolkit type of thing with a list of criteria in assessing whether or not Metaverse will be a good fit to the target company that the advertising executive is managing. And for example, if we identify the affordances such as immersive experience, specific targeting audiences, and communicating brand innovativeness, and these type of affordances. So it can be used as a criteria to decide whether or not these affordances would be a good fit, would be a good strategic fit for the brand, and whether or not it aligns with what the brand really wants to present themselves. And then that's basically one of the takeaway from that. For example, if we're talking about communicating brand innovativeness and the high-tech, forward, edgy type of image, is that something the brand really want to present in the metaverse? And that's the first thing. And then the second bit would be we identify these affordances such as limited reach and unclear ROI, unclear return of investment of the metaverse investment, and lack of in-house expertise, and all sorts of things, all sort of disaffordances. And for advertising execs, it will be very important for we reckon it will be important for them to use it as a checklist of risk-benefit analysis to really weigh the opportunity of metaverse against these constraints before allocating the budget, and the resources in the metaverse.
This is also very helpful for people who, work in the metaverse as well too. It's almost a way for them to, figure out how to better market themselves as well at a sort of a larger level.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I'm always curious, like, where did the idea for this article come from? Yeah.
Thanks, Colin. So, the idea for this article really came about from the kind of growing tension that we were seeing in the industry. So everywhere you looked, at conferences, in white papers, in the trade press, the metaverse was being hyped up as this next big thing in advertising. And it was all over headlines, it seemed. But then when we were actually talking to people in the industry, creative strategists or account managers, we were hearing a very different story. So a lot more caution was there, some skepticism, and in some cases, just they weren't that excited. There was a lack of enthusiasm. And that disconnect really made us curious. And if the metaverse is supposedly like the future of advertising, why weren't practitioners sounding a bit more excited about it? And why weren't they just diving in and adopting metaverse for their brands? And so we decided to dig deeper, and we wanted to actually talk to the people making these decisions about the metaverse, advertising, and the ones on the ground, figure out how, because they're the ones that are figuring out how or whether to allocate the budgets to these kinds of campaigns, right? And then when we looked a little bit deeper at the existing research at the time, we noticed that there was a huge gap. Not much had been done from a practitioner's perspective, and that's a big deal because advertisers are the ones actually funding the metaverse through their campaigns. Then they're the ones deciding whether this space grows or stalls. It felt like this was an elephant in the room that hadn't really been explored. So that's what motivated us to start this study, to really understand the thinking behind adoption or non-adoption of the metaverse in this advertising space.
I love that. I love how it's, very practitioner driven as well. And it's probably very important as well too for people who as you point out, many people probably had that intuition or sense of some of these different things, but it's of course nice to see it corroborated across so many interviews that you've done from so many different places around the world as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of challenges, I know you did interviews, so perhaps it's a little bit easier road than in other cases, but there's usually always challenges with research. So did you run into any with this particular, article? And if so, like, how did you overcome them?
Thanks, Colin. I really appreciate the question. Basically, we're running a couple challenges when we do the research project, and the first one would be pretty much the first one would be the diverse qualitative data. And then when we got the qualitative data, it is very deep. The profile of the participants are very diverse in terms of their seniority, the power they have over the budget and the resources, and their role in advertising industry. Some of them are media buyers, some of them are brand managers, some of them are consultant agencies. So they take very different perspective in approaching the issue of approaching this new technology thing. And they have different level of openness to new tech, and partially because of their individual differences, partially because of their brand overall, their company strategy. So we want to take all of these into account and really weigh these things and when analyzing our qualitative data and then really get a deeper meaning when it comes to, drawing the conclusion. And that's the first challenge. And the second would be, to get a stable convergent definition of metaverse. So, like it's been a while known that it's been pretty widely known that metaverse is like a constantly changing thing. It's like a moving target, changing over time and type of thing. And then as academic, we reach this sort of theoretical conclusion based on the technology bit or the marketing theory bit, but we don't really know what's the ground definition of metaverse and in advertising. And very importantly, how do these very important people, advertising execs, and people are at the very forefront of marketing, and people are at the forefront really managing advertisements, and how they see metaverse as a marketing channel, and how they reach how we can use and the very challenge would be how we can take everything into account and reach their convergent and stable definition of metaverse, regards to metaverse as a advertising outlet. Well, and basically we did a lot of endeavors in our methodology into addressing these challenges. Basically, everything that we do is to ensure that our data, our result analyzed are rigorous, and then we have our result cross-checked and validated in the iterative process. For example, we did a pilot quality assurance protocol, and before we start doing the interview, and then we have training reference materials to make sure everybody was well calibrated with how we approach the data, and given that it's dynamic nature. And we have the iterative discussion over time when we do the analysis, just make sure everybody have reached a consensus and agreement with the qualitative data. And by the end of it, we get to converge. By the way, by the end of it, we converge different interpretation of the data into the conclusion. And that's how we pretty much manage the research rigor and try to address the challenges in a way.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it seems really simple sometimes, the idea of coming up with a definition, but if we don't all talk about the same thing when we're going through and doing interviews or doing research, then it's not really as meaningful, the insights we kind of get, because we, in many cases, are talking about different things, right? So getting the definition is very key. Yeah.
That's very true.
All right, so the big one, of course, is always like where to next. So interesting findings you've got with this article. What kind of potential avenues do you think exist for, research coming next, or what kind of important questions does this open up as well?
Okay, thanks, Colin. Now, as with any research, it comes with limitations, and I think it really opens up some really exciting opportunities for future work. First, we deliberately spoke to advertisers working internationally and having a wider view, a wider range of brand communication roles. So that gave us a very broad understanding of what and how people across the industry are approaching the metaverse. But that breadth also meant that we didn't manage to go deep into these specific subfields, like what creative professionals think versus media buyers, and how these affordances play out in specific regions. So that's definitely a space where we see that there's room for future research, a more nuanced, localized understanding of affordances with different advertising specialties and geographical context. And then also context really matters. Affordances weren't aren't universal. They're shaped by the firm culture, they're shaped by the industry norms and business models. So, for example, B2B versus B2C firms, or comparing a fashion brand to a pharmaceutical company or a small boutique firm versus a multinational ad agency. All of these differences shape how the advertising and how the metaverse is perceived and used. So there's a real need for further studies that zoom into these industry specific and company size specific contexts to build a rich picture. And then third, in our research, we identified a set of affordances and disaffordances, but we didn't really rank them in terms of importance. That wasn't our goal. We didn't set out to say this is the most important drive of adoption and this is the biggest barrier. Instead, we offered a framework for thinking through these disaffordances as precursors to actual use or non-use. But future quantitative research could possibly take our findings and framework and test it to see which affordances carry the most weight, which when it comes to influencing behavior and adopting the metaverse. And then fourthly, something that emerged really clearly was that advertisers' affordances don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by the affordances of others, like the key decision makers within the organizations or the consumers that they're trying to target. But we didn't fully unpack these dynamic relationships and the dyadic and triadic relationships that form between the different stakeholders. So there's definitely room for further research to explore the ecosystem that more deeply and map out how these affordances interact and evolve together. And then finally, we looked at we worked on the assumption that advertisers' objectives align with the advertiser's goal. So when we talked about the metaverse and whether they'd use it, they'd talk about things like ROI and reach and brand awareness. But we also heard from the participants that other motivations can come and play a role, like people personally being curious about the metaverse, creative exploration, or just enjoying the process of playing with new tech. And that's an important reminder that affordances can be driven by intrinsic motivations, not just commercial ones. So future studies could maybe explore how these personal and even playful aspects of why advertisers engage with emerging technologies could come to play.
Yeah, I already add on to that. I already add on to that a couple creative ideas when it comes to future research. And we think it might be interesting to look at how does brand meaning interpreted in the metaverse. More specifically, because like in our study, we identified this sort of perceived innovativeness and high-tech brand image, but that's a very, very generic type of idea that we're thinking about. And then we want to know what other than the mere high-tech savviness type of image, what others can brand present in the metaverse by pushing their brand in the metaverse, the platform. And that's the first thing. And the other thing I'm thinking about is that it would be very interesting to know about how can advertisers build long-term brand assets in metaverse. Because like a lot of practical scenarios we see the metaverse campaigns, they're very much one-off stun type of campaign, and then it'll be very interesting to know how can brands shift this sort of temporary activation of hype into enduring and persistent brand image and the brand equity in this new platform.
Yeah, so many ideas. I love it. Yeah. Well, it's been a complete pleasure talking to both of you. So thank you again, Amy and Will, for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us.
And for anyone who's more interested in taking a look at their article, again, it's in the September 2024 issue of JAR, and the title is What Drives Advertisers Toward or Away from Immersive Virtual Spaces? The Metaverse Conundrum, Affordances and Disaffordances Through the Eyes of Advertisers. So thanks again for being on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you so much.